And a very pleasant good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Morning Exiles podcast. I'm Bill Profita, that handsome devil. Oh, you shaved your beard.
Well, I mowed it. I mowed my face.
Look like you took a weed whacker to it. I was going to say that handsome bearded gentleman next to me is Kevin Gallagher.
I trimmed it all down, and then I was going to shave, but my Norelco was lost the charge.
So for this Christmas, you need Santa riding the Norelco down the hill?
I just need to charge it up, yeah. Rolling heads.
You charging things. You always forget to charge things, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So there we have it. We got a lot to talk about today. Councilman Matt Watson.
Do you have any media people you want to horribly embarrass today? I got one. Lieutenant Don Stone.
Yeah, the LT. And I'll tell you what. Same guy, 8th time. So I'm going to give him a pass this week. Other than that, even my dog looks up at me and says, "Why are you making fun of that guy?" So, same guy, 8th time. But next week, I'm telling you, if he misspells words, anyway, please continue.
Don Stone, our friend with the Baton Rouge Police.
LT.
The story about the kid in, where was it, Tennessee?
No, Alabama.
Alabama, who called in the bomb threat to Tiger Stadium, and he told the police that the reason he did it was because his buddy was going to lose a bet on the game.
Yeah, there's a good reason.
He said 2 different TV stations, 2 different headlines. One said he pleaded guilty, one said not guilty.
Right.
Who's right?
He pleaded not guilty.
He pleaded not guilty.
Because if you go in and plead guilty, your options are like zero.
I'm sure, now, he didn't name the news sources, but I think if you go back and check, it probably says not guilty now.
It all says not guilty now, because I did go back and check. And see, what these people forget is that Google archives these.
Mm-hmm.
So
you can find them.
Well, I typed in University of Alabama student pleads guilty to, and boop, but I say no more.
Okay.
I don't want to be accused of picking on people, though they may deserve it. Anyway, on the program today, Councilman Matt Watson, and then a good friend of ours, a lot of you know this guy, Mike Cammarosano. I guess today we should call him Chief Mike Cammarosano because he is being inducted into the Louisiana Firefighters Hall of Fame, Chiefs Hall of Fame, rather. And I want to tell you why, but I'm going to let you tell him more about it because he had a very long career starting in the military in the Air Force. But do you remember the big, huge train derailment in Goldana that burned and burned and burned?
That was the late 70s, and I was in Pennsylvania at the time. It made national headlines.
Well, he was with the State Fire Marshal's office at that time as a State Fire Marshal, and they said, "We are bringing in an expert to put it out." And he did, saving a lot of property and a lot of lives because that could have been very, very bad. So we'll talk to Mike in just a few minutes. Matt Watson, how you doing, bud?
I don't know. Mike also makes a mean Italian lunch.
He does. He makes a great Italian lunch. You saw the newspaper article?
I did.
And he also hand makes his own pasta, but that's for another program. We're saving it until we get closer to Christmas. I'm going to do a thing called Men in the Kitchen as we get closer to Christmas, and we're going to have all these guys that cook, since we have a camera here, to talk about what they cook and how they cook it. So.
And limoncello.
Face the microphone. This is not your first rodeo. And
Mike Cammarosano makes a great limoncello.
Yes, he does.
There you go.
And from what I understand, those of you on the council could use a couple 3 bottles of that to pour shots during the council meeting. What's going on?
Some could. Last night was a planning commission meeting. That was just merely the planning commission. I don't mean merely, but it wasn't a council action. It was a planning commission action.
Like we actually do some planning.
Well, what's interesting about this is something was settled last night. As you know, we had an election on October 12th where the folks in the area, soon to be, officially made St. George, chose their own destiny and would have their own mayor, their own council, their own Department of Public Works, whether that's privatized or whether that's something they do on their own. But they'd also have their own planning commission. Mm-hmm. We had some folks write in asking that anything that was to be decided upon for rezoning in the area that would be St. George should be deferred until the folks in St. George could make that determination.
That makes sense.
Seems fair.
Well, to me...
So what did we actually do?
What's happening is I wrote to the parish attorney to say, look, I need to have this information right away because we've got meetings scheduled. We've got people who've paid the money, paid to advertise. We've already had signage out. People already had public meetings. Where are we going to go from here? How are we going to proceed? The letter that I got back was there's no one in St. George. There's no planning commission to turn these over to. With the threats from the current mayor to try to look in Title 33 for means of trying to sue to stop the incorporation of St. George or anyone else that may want to file a suit against St. George, this could take some time before a planning commission is officially put together. So it would be basically an indefinite deferral of freezing someone's property for that amount of time.
Let me ask you a question. We go through all right, you can't supersede federal law with a state law. You can't supersede state law with a parish law.
Okay.
You can't supersede parish law with a city law. So why are we even talking about planning commission? Because the planning commission is for the entire parish of East Baton Rouge, as is DPW. Why are we even doing this?
Because there was some requests made. Look, let's just be frank on this. There's a couple of rezonings that some of the adjacent property owners don't like. Chances are that a lot of council members may be in favor of that rezoning taking place. And this was wait a minute, I could try this and see if it could be pushed off to, let's throw it on the planning commission of the as yet to be determined St. George.
So how does it stand after the...
Stands right now, the parish attorney says we're going to continue doing business as usual until the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and St. George has a planning commission to accept the request.
Can St. George have their own planning commission? Because we don't have a City of Baton Rouge planning commission. We use the parish planning commission.
Understood, but Central and Zachary and Baker have their own planning commissions.
Well, that explains a lot.
I'm
Long
just
pause.
saying,
I don't know what to do with that.
those are other municipalities in our parish.
Thank you, Kevin.
That's great. That's great.
We keep this on hand. See, when you get something right, you get that.
Oh, wow.
When you get something wrong,
Well.
so remember, I have my fingers on the button, okay?
Okay, so anyway, we had a council planning and zoning meeting. It's not a standard council meeting where we change, laws and accept low bids, all that kind of stuff. Just strictly a council meeting on planning and zoning. In that meeting, there was a rezoning on Hushatu in Dwight Hudson's district. He motioned for approval. Denise Amoroso, who has a good bit of her district in St. George as well, she seconded the motion. We've had the response from the parish attorney, and then we had action by council people who had both areas inside and outside of St. George, set a precedent moving forward that we're going to accept those rezonings. If we were going to accept any one rezoning, we have to accept them all or reject one based on, because it's in St. George, we'd have to reject them all, if that was going to be the reason.
I understand this, but I also think that there's another principle at play here, is what does the statute establishing a planning and zoning commission say? Are people not entitled to a timely response to their requests?
I would think so. And I'm really rather shocked. Now that the precedent's been set, I will say this out loud. I was thinking this is an opportunity for this mayor, who has tried to act in every way possible to undermine, St. George, and at the end of Kip Holden's last term, to take out as much sales tax generating property as possible, that this might have been played with as a political football to stop any kind of increase in property tax or sales tax generation, therefore benefiting St. George, and therefore to act as though we should freeze until they're done would have frozen any expansion or economic growth to some extent in St. George as a means of just being vindictive.
That being said, I think we're going to have some more of these little skirmishes and ends around and all that.
Oh, I guarantee it.
I don't think we can avoid that. But there are council members like you who, as a result of this election, have your feet in both ponds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have since the get-go. I mean, when I worked for the previous council person, a lot of those annexations were the Mall, Louisiana is in District 11. the Grove, where the new auctioneer clinic, that's in District 11. So a lot of these deals that were made to get people to annex themselves in or request to have themselves annexed in, because those annexations have to start with the property owner, the taxpayer of that area asking.
Pick me, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, saying, I'd like to do this.
But as I've said many times, the city can ask for the ask.
The city
If you
can,
will.
but it's not like
Someone
the
can approach
Soviet
and say,
Union.
hey, why don't you ask us to...
Certainly. But you can't roll the tanks into Czechoslovakia, USSR style, and annex property that doesn't want to be annexed.
And by the way, in fairness and full disclosure, the very day after the election that would establish St. George, their organizers said, now, if anybody wants out, you can do the same ask for people that want in. I thought they were very magnanimous about that.
Exactly. And look, I am the council person for anyone in District 11. District 11 is a metro council, as you rightfully said about the planning commission earlier. It handles the whole parish, unless there's pockets that are already established that handle things on their own. The metro council is districts divided up to be relatively equal amounts of people, about 40,000 people, give or take. I have property that's both inside the city limits. I've got property that's now included in the area to be St. George, and I've got areas that are unincorporated and will remain unincorporated unless somebody makes an ask, because they're surrounded by, the city.
Yeah, you're going to hear...
You got the fire department come to pay you a visit?
Yeah,
Mike?
you're going to hear some emergency
that's his
vehicles
ride.
as they're still trying to sort out this crash that happened in the wee small hours that took out some utility poles.
Gotcha.
I want to see the BAC of the driver.
Well, we had, so I've got property that's, to get back to this, I've got property inside Baton Rouge, property inside of what will be St. George, and properties that are unincorporated at this point. I already spoke with some folks that are part of a small subdivision that before this happened, they said, look, if this comes out, we don't want to be in St. George. We don't know what the future is going to look like. It's so uncertain. I don't want to be in it. Now, mind you, unlike what the M.E. Cormiers of the world that are saying Baton Rouge, you have to be part of Baton Rouge or you're unpatriotic or something. I'm paraphrasing by any means, but I don't think
I believe the word you're looking for is racist.
Yeah, well, exactly.
St. George.
Some of these folks that want to be removed, have the opportunity to be removed from St. George, don't necessarily want to be part of Baton Rouge. They just want to return to the placid days of being unincorporated. That's exactly what they're looking for.
There's nothing really wrong with that.
Oh, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. A lot of people, Phil Witter has not asked for his property to be annexed into the city.
Well, that's because
he's in the middle of town, and
he's got a throne that sits on $100 bills.
No.
And his horses bring his crown to him every day. Yeah. Why would he want to be part of this?
Exactly. And he's surrounded by the city, so St. George is not contiguous with him, and unless he makes the request of the city, he can't be part of the city of Baton Rouge.
Matt, Drew Morrell is watching the podcast, and he asked a question. When he was the spokesman, he spoke very eloquently for St. George. He says, will Baton Rouge provide fire and police protection to the areas that it does annex? By law, they have to.
By law, they absolutely have to. Now, I will say, as Drew's, I'm sure, aware, he's an astute attorney, he's going to be aware of the cooperative agreement that we've got with St. George and Eastside Fire, that if there's something that St. George can get to first, even though the location might be in the city, St. George will take care of it.
Well, it's a fire, for God's sakes.
With the St. George Fire Department on Jefferson Highway, and right across the street is Berkeley Hill that's inside the city limits of Baton Rouge, St. George is going to put the fire out. Now, meanwhile, Phil Witter's property is unincorporated, but there's the Clay Cut BRFD station right at Clay Cut and Jefferson. They're going to come put it out. That's a safety issue. That's a fire rating issue. That's an insurance issue. I'll say on the other side of that coin, the mess that is BRPD, and I do not mean the great people who sacrifice their safety every day to come out and protect strangers. Those people are absolute heroes. The organization of BRPD is a mess when you are losing police officers at an alarming rate, and you can't hire enough so that you eventually give people tons of overtime to cover these sprawling new areas that have a lot of distance to travel from your precinct office out or your district office out to the location.
That was the question I was going to ask next. The city, over the last couple, 3 years, has annexed a lot of high-density properties, and they've not hired more police officers or shifted the districts around to cover these. Now, sooner or later, someone is going to have to address this.
Well, I agree. I think sooner or later somebody's going to have to address the police pay situation, which I've been talking about for years, which took, by the way, as a reminder to your listeners, it took this administration one day short of an entire year and the expenditure of one rookie police officer's full year's salary to accomplish, only to have nothing done with it. So we need to right people's pay. We also need to correct the atmosphere, I think, at the police department so that the police officers feel like they can be police officers instead of rolling around and thinking, God, I don't want to get involved in this if I don't have to get involved in this. And I'm not saying every police officer has that feeling, but many do, and many have told me that, God, if I proactively police, I'm going to be portrayed as the bad guy by the mayor, by my police chief, and certainly by the media.
Well, and there is, if you look at historically, and we don't have to go back that far, let's go back 10 years. If you look at a political interjection into a police-involved incident where they throw in a racial component, where there is a firearm used, where there's all kinds of investigations, where the administration or the council or whomever allows people to make accusations that go unanswered until investigations by everybody, including the Postmaster General, are concluded. What happens is you have a year or so of what the International Association of Police Chiefs call depolicing.
Correct.
And I'm not going to use the Baton Rouge incident. I'm going to use New York City. I'm going to use Abner Louima. Okay. The guy was getting arrested for selling loose cigarettes. The cop was doing his job. If you don't want people making CS arrests like that, go to the legislature, they call it the State Assembly in New York, and change the damn law. But this is what we see, and we see this a lot. We see a situation that rapidly happens and gets out of control. And you've got people who aren't there, who weren't there, who come back 4 days later and they say, you're wrong and your whole department is wrong and you're too violent and you're racist and you're mean and you're nasty and you wear stinky underwear and, things like this.
And you're funny looking.
And you got the people on the street who are underpaid, who have to put up with this crap every day in certain districts, and they say, okay, you want to call me names? And I'm riding by, and I see two people in the yard, and they're drinking out of an open container? I ain't stopping. And if you notice, while the murder rate is down in Baton Rouge, although this weekend they did a good job of trying to catch up,
sadly,
the arrest rate, overall arrests by police officers, people taken into custody, is down. Just saying.
Well, let me, if I could address that. The arrest rate is down. However, as you're probably very well aware, when I made a simple request of the current police chief for non-fatal shootings, to use the vernacular, seemed to go nuts, wanting to know who told you we had that information. We don't have that information. Only to have days later have him go before the press club to say that we do have the information because he so proudly went after that information. Now, he had to admit that those shootings were drastically on the rise. The DA, in an article, backed me up in saying that this is the true test of how violent your city is non-fatal shootings, because we've got great doctors, great EMTs, and now the ATF came to town and trained our police officers to have a triage pack for handling,
and they've
injuries.
used them, by the way.
They have to. Look, the gentleman that got hit by the train up in Scotlandville, and we had the African-American gentleman that got ran over by a train was treated and had his life saved through a triage unit from a white police officer that was from Central that was on BRPD. If that doesn't show you, that one instance at least doesn't say race doesn't play any kind of any role when there's an emergency, it was the training of that police officer. These folks, the reason why the police officers have this triage unit is if you, heaven forbid, you have a shooting in a large area, until the scene is stabilized and you've got the shooter or shooters or whoever is doing whatever in custody and it's safe for entry for fire or EMS, they can't go in and treat anybody. So the police officers are the only people who can be in there and treat folks. So you're going to have a lot more folks survive being shot, which is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, you have to track those numbers to kind of get an idea of how you're doing as a police force.
I think we start to get into areas that are a bit shaded. I said shaded, not shady. Because there is a police report that is a public record every time a weapon is discharged, even if they're called out to somebody
Certainly.
firing it in the air. So those records do exist.
However, if someone, I'll name no names, if someone doesn't want to have all that information made public, then the cry will be, you know how much work that'll be for us to go through all this? We just don't have the staff to go do it, et cetera, et
But
cetera.
the record is public the minute the officer puts pencil to paper. The
Understood.
record is public. Yeah, and I say pencil to paper, I mean tab it his computer, of course. But
Sure.
And again, when I say depolicing, I don't mean that the cops aren't going to answer a burglary call on 72nd Street.
Certainly.
Or a shooter
Certainly.
a shooter on Harding Boulevard like 2 nights ago. I don't mean that. But I mean when they see people in the yard with an open container, or they might smell a little grass coming from a driveway, carport or something like that, and it's an area where things have a tendency to get into yelling matches, why you here, why you bothering me, they're just going to roll on by. And you can't blame them. Because instead of the perpetrator having their ass on the line, it's the cop.
You combine that with being nearly 100 officers down from what you're supposed to have. You're going to end up with a situation which happened like in June where Highland Coffees was robbed, and it took 1 hour. This is a statement from a police officer that I knew that was privy to the situation. It took an hour for an officer to arrive to get statements from people. Now, at an LSU, across the street from LSU location, how many students that may have seen something go on at that location are going to mill around for an hour
No, they're not going to wait.
to file their report as a witness? You know how far the district office is from Highland Coffees down Highland Road. It's scant about a half a mile.
With your lights on, about 40 seconds.
Exactly. 1 hour. And it's not because they don't want to show up. It's because they're undermanned and they've got people elsewhere that have to travel further because they're not waiting around at the office on Highland Road like it's Andy and Mayberry. They're out patrolling and taking care of things that they've got to catch up on.
Now here's the real question. You and most of your colleagues on the council, I think, feel the police need a raise and they need more money or more manpower. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that all of them do. I know there's a good number of people on the council who do.
All right. And you've got a police department that knows they need a pay raise and more
Certainly.
manpower and better equipment, right?
Exactly.
So when the St. George thing is finalized, is the administration going to plead lack of tax funding from what used to be this part of the parish alone and now the incorporated area as a reason they can't supply BRPD with this?
I wouldn't be surprised that this administration comes up with any reason not to take care of the police department. She wants to say that the numbers are down. She went, I think it was July 2nd, I think it was. I may be wrong on that. In front of them in the library. This isn't Gotham City. The numbers are down. Look at the numbers. And of course, she cherry-picked the numbers that were down and left out all the numbers that were up. So she wanted to say, numbers are down. This isn't Gotham City. Then the chief of police comes up and sort of mockingly says that anybody who says we need more police, stop it. I could have had 200 more police out on the road. It wouldn't have changed anything. Anyone that
I've
I've
heard
spoken,
that argument before. It's fallacious in my opinion.
it's wrong. It's completely wrong. It is completely wrong. You don't have to be any tenured police chief to understand if you've got more police on the road, you have better resources to address the safety issues of the people in North Baton Rouge, South Baton Rouge, at that club on Florida Boulevard where the chief of police blamed the owners of the club for not frisking everyone who came into the club. When the guy went out to his car to go get a semi-automatic weapon and busted back in shooting.
I've got to say that I have never, in all of these incidents nationwide, I have never heard a mayor or a police chief or a sheriff, if it happened to be in the county elsewhere, say more officers would not have made a difference. I've never heard that.
That is a ridiculous statement. That is a
Actually,
ridiculous
be made by the chief
statement.
of police.
Absolutely. And only to come to the press club and say that he was going to add 16 more police officers downtown, which is just a vanity bow on the DDD downtown, the Downtown Development District, to make sure that anyone visiting downtown could feel more safe because we've got 16 more officers.
Well,
not to mention the fact that he was asked, okay, 16 more officers, how many do you currently have? And then not be able to answer that question.
Because it ain't many.
Seriously?
And that is something that needs to be done in the downtown office, police department substation, because you have too few cops to handle too many people when you've got things going on.
When we have events and things downtown, they make arrangements to put more police officers downtown.
Matt, we got about 5 minutes left. Sure. I want to talk about the sheriff's department and St. George and other services. Again,
I sat down with the sheriff across, just like the same distance we are at his office, and I said, you are going to continue providing law enforcement through EBRSO for all the area of St. George. He said, absolutely. I've been providing law enforcement to that area, this entire time since he's been sheriff. If that area wants additional coverage, they can either form their own police force or they can pay for extra duty police officers. Now, inside St. George, the area that will be St. George when it's finalized, there are neighborhoods that have crime prevention districts where they tax each parcel and get extra coverage.
Yeah.
But I think the sheriff is a very competent leader of his department and will provide excellent law enforcement.
Well, I think the real important question for people who are watching and listening right now and who have the same curiosity, and I don't know that you have this information at hand, but we can all think about it and revisit it, is if you look at the area that is to be incorporated alone, are their crime stats rising above the national average? Are they stable or are they lower? And that's going to determine whether or not they need additional protection. Because as you point out, and a lot of people don't get this, the sheriff is doing it now. The sheriff has been doing it since the very beginning.
Correct.
And I think we need to look at their crime stats. Now,
we do.
If they put in a major 4-lane highway that's got 55 miles an hour, you're going to need a few more deputies because you're going to have more accidents. I get that.
I understand that. We also have a lot of state routes we've got I-10 and portions of I-12 and a lot of state routes in St. George. Those should be patrolled by state police in addition to
And as far as I can
EBRSO.
tell, boy, it looks like there's 500 white Suburbans with a map on the side up in that area. It looks like the state police got that covered pretty well.
Exactly. And those guys, like anyone who's a state police officer, predominantly is going to be making traffic stops of a suspicious vehicle, a damaged vehicle, erratic driving, or speeding. That's going to be what they're going to handle most often. And that's going to leave EBRSO to come to an alarm going off or someone saying there's a suspicious person walking through my neighborhood or someone set the alarm off on my car.
Matt, I have one question before you go. If you're acquainted with the city fisc, the city parish fisc, but specifically the city, is there room for the city to reprioritize their spending?
They absolutely have
and
to.
give the police more money?
Whether they can come up with whether the powers that be on the fourth floor, which is where finance is, can honestly look at the books, and they may honestly look at the books every day. I think they do. But then they don't give that to anyone but the mayor's office, and then the mayor changes the narrative when it comes out. So I was told that we'd be $48.8 million down in revenue at the mid-year pre-2020 budget meeting. Darrell was there, the current mayor was there, head of finance, Linda Hunt was there, and her second in command, Angie, was there. we looked at $48.8 million in lost revenue. And I said, okay, that makes sense. I turned to Linda and said, Linda, what is the responsibility we're now alleviating ourselves of from a parish budget? Because you no longer have the responsibility of filling potholes, fixing sidewalks and fixing some drainage in St. George. She looked at me, she looked at the mayor, she looked back at me and said, we have no way to quantify that money.
What?
So I know how much we're going to lose financially, but I don't have any means to tell you what we've been spending out there that we'd no longer have to spend out there to offset the loss of $48.8 million.
We know what it is. It's all of the shut up and get back in the truck projects, the community centers,
No, we're talking about St. George. So we're talking about...
Well, I'm talking about from the city where you can cut money.
They can't
Oh, yeah, I
compute how
understand
much
that.
they would save from not having to maintain areas of St. George.
Well, you can say two things. They can't compute, or they haven't computed, and the dollar amount is so low, it would have motivated more voter turnout on October 12th had they released that number. Because I think there's a severe disparity between collection and expenditure in that area.
Matt Watson,
Wow.
Metro Councilman, always a pleasure to have you with us. It's been a little while because you've been busy. Things have been busy. There's been elections going on.
There's been a lot of elections
and
they're still
but,
going on.
I'm sure we will visit again very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You want to endorse in the governor's race? I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Here's my endorsement. Everybody get out and vote.
He's got a new tattoo on his wrist that says JBE. No, that's not it.
No, it's back the blue is what it is.
God bless you for that.
All right.
Back to
Thank
blue.
you.
Matt-
Thank you all so
Matt,
much.
always good to see you, my friend.
Good to
Thank
have
you.
you with us.
Bill, thank you so
All right,
much.
we'll do a little cash change here as we continue with the Morning Exiles podcast. And Matt, there's something I need to talk to you about in person. I'll give you a call later on today. That's a nice thing about having guests right in front of you. Joining us right now is a good friend of mine and a lot of folks in Baton Rouge. Now, many of you know Mike Cammarosano because he was the director of public relations for Ruth's Chris Steakhouse for many, many, many years. He and TJ Moran made sure that everybody had a good meal and a good time and a full glass at that restaurant for a lot of years. But before that, Mike was involved in the fire service very, very heavily. He came out of the Air Force after his 4 years and went to work as a firefighter, worked his way up to chief of the Logansport Fire Department, and then went to work for the state fire marshal's office when, I guess it was V.J. Bell at that time, was just getting things organized into a functioning major state fire marshal's office. And he worked as a deputy state fire marshal for a lot of years. And today, Mike is being inducted at 2 p.m. at the state fire marshal's office, which is on Independence Boulevard, part of the state police campus, into the Louisiana Fire Chiefs Hall of Fame. Mike, good morning. How are you?
Oh, doing great, Bill.
Get a little closer to that microphone.
Yeah, lean into that
Yeah,
thing.
let everybody hear you.
Well, usually they tell me to shut up. Now you tell me to get closer.
Oh, I'll let you know when it's time.
It's going to be a great day today.
It is going to be a great day. And like I said, a lot of people know you from Ruth's Chris Restaurant. And we always had fun when you were there. And then as we got to know you better, we got to know about your background, served in the Air Force, got sent to some god-awful places. Iceland?
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a little cold.
A little cold there. And you were there in the middle of the Cold War.
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, had a lot of alerts.
A lot of 24 hours.
And then came out and went to the fire service. And you and I were talking just the other day. I remember very vividly. I was a younger man in my first tour in the media when this train went off the rails in Goldana, Louisiana, and it was carrying flammable, hazardous material. There were fatalities, there were explosions, and they called the state fire marshal's office. You were there by that time for some help, and they said, "We're going to send you an expert to put it out," and that expert was you.
Yep.
Tell me how that went down.
Well, the background of it, Bill, is I had handled about 5 different train derailments prior to going to work for the fire marshal's office, so they knew that. And they called me, and I was in Shreveport at the time. And they said, get down there and see if you can put that out. So I drove down and on the radio in the car, they're saying, everybody back out, there's an expert coming. Well, my head almost didn't fit in the car by the time I got there. But got down there and had to assess the problem. And by that time, they had evacuated everything because there was fires and more stuff leaking. And I said, well, I've got to go down there to take a look and see what it is. And they're saying, you're going to be crazy. I said, well, there's no other way of doing it.
Now, when you say go down there, you mean go into the heart of the fire.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the only way you could tell, what was going on. So I took a notepad, a pad and a pencil and went down there. And a guy went with me. He said, I'll go with you and I'll stay with you. I said, okay. And we went down there and I drew out what we had, and I found a tank car that had a small leak, but it was burning, and it was impinging on an LP gas tank.
Oh, good God.
And my fear was that it was going to heat it to the point where it's going to explode and we'd have another levee and some more fire and more deaths. So I went back up and got the fire people together, and we were in a room, and I was very serious with them because I didn't want anyone going with me that might not want to be there. Mm-hmm. And I said, I only want firefighters in there. And there was this guy standing there, and I think I related that story to you, Bill. And he kept, and I said, are you a fireman? He said, no. I said, would you get out, please? So he left, and we made a decision, and I took the guys, and we went down there, and we put one line on the LP gas tank to keep it cool, while we went in with more lines and put this smaller fire out that was impinging. And now this took a couple of days, and then we did plug the leak on it and offloaded that. And when I went back to do some more reports, there was this guy standing there again, and I said, sir, would you please get out of the way? I need to get this stuff done. Well, later that day, Colonel Bo Garrison came walking towards me with this person. And I said, Colonel, he said, Mike, you did a heck of a job, brother. And he said, I want to introduce you to Congressman Jerry Huckabee.
Yipes.
And about that time, I thought I was gone. And
yipes.
He said, no, you absolutely true what you did. And he said, I really didn't belong there, and I know what you were doing. And wound up getting a really nice commendation from Congress for putting the fire out and everything after that.
You had bodies with this fire. There were fatalities.
Yeah, the original cause of it was that there was a log truck on the tracks crossing over, and the train hit that, derailed it. One tank blew immediately, and what we call a levee, where the whole thing goes and it shoots up in the air like a rocket.
Wow.
So there was fire everywhere. There was, and it was pretty hairy for a while.
Now you said you had to basically walk right into the fire. What kind of tech did you have in this was in the 70s,
yeah,
late 70s.
It was.
What did you have to protect you from the heat and the flame?
Well, I still had my old bunker gear.
Uh-huh.
It was in the trunk of the car, and we took masks. We had some breathing apparatus just in case there was poison.
But even with that gear, what kind of temperatures were you?
Oh no, the fires were not that intense at that time because when that levee, it burned a couple of buildings and stuff, but they had calmed down.
Okay.
There were a lot of trees and stuff burning, and then that one tank. So it wasn't that intense heat in that one.
I'm having like visions of Red Adair, in the silver suit and everything, and just walking right into it. Was it like that?
No, it wasn't that bad. It was the leaks that were bad. The stuff that we didn't know was going to blow up on us if we turned around the wrong way.
I find it interesting, though, that you had all the firefighters in a room and you said, if you don't want to go, I understand, don't go. What would have happened if 80% of them said, thanks, Mike, I'm out of here?
Well, I had been around since '63 around firefighters. And I know that, I knew that there was going to be some go with me. Mm-hmm. I mean, because it's part of the job. And you don't become a fireman to not do something to help somebody. We were talking earlier, someone asked me one time, how do you become a firefighter? I said, well, they do a lobotomy because you got to be a little crazy to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. But you learn to put the fear behind you and go do the job that has to be done. So, and I think every one of them volunteered to go, so nobody backed out on me.
I also remember when you were with a municipal fire department, and I don't remember which one, that you all had one of the first fire department ambulance services. A lot of communities were being served by funeral homes. And boy, the last thing, Kevin, you want to see
is a hearse.
If you're in a wreck, is a hearse with a gumball on it going, how quick are they going to get me to the hospital?
Yeah, it was mid-'60s when most of the funeral homes went out of the business. And I got my guys together and I said, we've got to do something. We've got to have ambulance service. And we talked to SWEPCO, the electric company up North Louisiana, and they gave us a vehicle to use as an ambulance.
No kidding.
We went to the funeral home and begged a stretcher from them, and we rigged up one, and we handled most of DeSoto Parish with that ambulance and never charged anyone. It was all free and everything. And we decided then we needed another one because we had run the wheels off of it. And we had a raffle to raise the money, and we didn't have the money to buy the rifle we were raffling off. And the guy said, I'll put it in the window. And one guy told me, he said, boy, I sure wish I had that rifle. I said, oh, I sure wish we had it. But we made enough money off of it, and we built a real new modern ambulance for that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it slowly evolved into the EMS that you have now. But we started it in the 60s. It was wonderful.
Let me ask you this. Like a lot of people that have been involved in public service, and Kevin, you know this, but I'm going to tell everybody else, Mike is involved with all kinds of veterans groups. Mike is heavily involved with the fundraiser to get a permanent home at the State Fire Marshal's office for the Spirit of Louisiana, the fire engine that you and I and everybody else gave money to build to send to New York after 9/11. We're going to let you talk about that in a second. But like so many people in public service, once you retired from public service, you started making real money as Director of Public Relations for Ruth's Chris. Do you wish you'd done that sooner?
No, I wouldn't trade anything for it. The memories and what we did, every time we rolled, we were helping somebody. If we went out with a fire, a heart attack, an automobile accident, whatever it was, we were always helping somebody. And the money really, there was times it was a little tight, but boy, sure made up for it when you got back and
so it's the difference between making money and making a difference.
And that's what we did. The guys love it. You don't go in those jobs to become rich. You go in to help people.
By the way, Mike, I wanted to, I'm sorry, Bill, Kathy is, your daughter Kathy is watching right now.
Yes, they live in
says,
Covington.
She says, yay, Dad, so proud of you, with lots of heart faces, and says, looking forward to seeing you today.
What about a little love for Bill and Kevin, Kathy? Jeez. I have a brother-in-law who retired 3 years ago as a fire captain in suburban Chicago. And he would not have changed any of his, I think he was like 24 years in the fire service. And firefighters always say that. They say, nah, I would do this if they'd let me until I was 80.
Yeah. You just can't do it once you get our age, Bill. Just putting the gear on would be incapacitated.
It weighs. What does that bunker gear weigh these days? Something like 46 pounds, something like that?
A little bit more than that because, by the time you put the boots and everything on, and then you put, pack on, and then pick up a load of hose to carry in.
Gets a little heavy.
Yeah, we could never do it.
Mike, did you ever lose a firefighter under your command?
No, I was very fortunate.
Marvelous.
Yeah, we got in some hairy places, but and after those things, we'd get back to the firehouse and sit around and talk about it, and somebody would inevitably laugh and say, "Boy, we almost got it that time." But you had to have that attitude, otherwise you wouldn't do it.
You almost lost you once. Something exploded directly over your head.
Yeah, we had gone on to Texas on a mutual aid, and the LP gas tank had leaked and blew up a house and everything. And they thought I was dead because I was trying to plug the leak under the tank, and they heard me on my radio in my car when I'd somehow gotten across the road. I don't know if it blew me over there. And I was sitting on the running board of the truck after we got it all under control. And I guess I can say I was lighting a cigarette, but, you know, I know that's, but I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette, and the chaplain comes over. He said, you know, Mike, he said, we thought you were dead.
Wow.
And I said, well, I thought I was too, but, I made it. He said, well, the good Lord's saving you for something. I said, well, can you see what the date is and kind of move it up a little bit? He said, can't you be serious? I said, no. You know, you had to have the attitude that I'm going to come out of this.
Well, and Mike's an old New Yorker. I was wondering if anybody measured with a tape to see if you beat Mickey Mantle's home run. How far did you fly?
I was across the road, you know, and my car was there, so I got on the car and I was calling for more equipment.
Now, let's
So two-lane highway, that's 40 feet?
yeah, at least.
It
Wow.
was a cold night, and fortunately, I had put all my gear on and had my collar up and everything. So I lost some eyebrows, and and Kathy, you know, Kathy was young and she was home. You know, they never knew what was going on. You didn't have cell phones, you know, tell people immediately what was happening.
Let's take a minute to talk about the spirit of Louisiana. Again, many of you who are watching and listening, think back 18 years, and you probably gave some money to get this fire engine built for the city of New York. They lost so much apparatus after 9/11, crushed by the falling buildings. And the fire engine served with distinction in New York. And then after Katrina, the fire department sent it here to help out. We now have possession of this fire engine again because it's old enough that it would be retired anyway.
Right.
It's been completely restored, and it's going to be a permanent part of a museum at the State Fire Marshal's office. But we need to build a building big enough to house it and to allow people to walk around it. So, Mike, what are we doing to try to make this money?
Well, we've got a campaign going on to build a home for the Spirit, and it was dubbed the Spirit when it went to New York. We've got a GoFundMe page, and people can link onto the fire marshal's office to get to that. Or they can send us a check. We need around $300,000-$400,000 to build a building.
This is a big building.
Yeah, because the truck is big.
Yeah.
We want to have a classroom type atmosphere in there so they can bring children in, school children, and tell them the story of, because the truck, it went to New York, yes. The truck also stopped on the way when President Bush heard about what Louisiana was doing. They stopped at the White House and took pictures with it. New York, when they brought it back after Katrina, it was the greatest sight to see that truck coming back, flag on the back. And they rotated 400 New York firefighters into New Orleans after Katrina to help out. And I was at Ruth's Chris at the time, and one night there was a firefighter from New York. He had his shirt on. I said, he said, yeah, and he was eating. I said, you in New Orleans? He said, yeah, they sent me up here to get supplies because there was nothing.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, I saw that sign, Ruth's Chris, and he said, I had to eat. And I said, I tell you what, buddy, this is on me. And you tell all those other firefighters, whenever they come up here, stop here because they'll never pay for a meal. And TJ heard that I did that. He said, don't you ever, and don't you sign for it. I mean, don't you pay for it, just sign it. And he picked up all the tabs for all those firefighters.
God bless TJ for that.
Oh, no, he was wonderful. Then, after New Orleans got finished with it, we had it rebuilt at Farrar. And then it went up to Hurricane Sandy after Hurricane, so it went back up to New York again to help. So it's got a lot of history behind it. And we want children to find out about this, and adults also. But when we raised all that money, it was all, there's no state funds, no city funds. It was all public donations, down to a little kid, and one day I hope we can find him. He came up with an Altoids mint container with 38 cents in it. That's all he could raise. But he gave that, and that was given to New York when they took the truck up there. As but it was down to that, kids with pennies.
Well, I mean, it was so immediate. I mean,
Yes.
the funding started 4 or 5 days after the planes hit the towers. It was pretty quick.
Yeah, and when it was delivered up there in December, Ferrara had people working 24 hours a day on it, and then raised enough money not only for the one truck, but we sent several service vehicles up there with the extra money that was raised. and it was just a wonderful.
Now,
If you go on GoFundMe, what do you search for in order to?
Let me read it to you exactly.
Okay.
I thought you might ask that question.
he's prepared.
My wife will tell you I'm the worst person on computers in the world. But GoFundMe, it's the House for the Spirit.
House for the Spirit.
Yeah.
So search that on GoFundMe and give as much as you can.
Or they can send a
your
check
conscience
to the
dictates.
fire marshal's office, 8181 Independence Boulevard. They can send a check there. We have, the people who will take the money and we'll get it in the bank and get the building started.
$300K is not a lot of money. It's not. I mean, it's not a huge sum of money. I mean, I've seen people with terrible stories to tell that have been able to get that much on GoFundMe. So
I know. We're hoping.
Yeah. 8181 Independence Boulevard, and that should be in 70806. Yes. All right. Now, Kevin, I got to tell you this. We always knew after hurricanes when the power was back on in the College Drive area. Do you know how we knew that? Because Mike would show up at the radio station with steak sandwiches for everybody from the kitchen of Ruth's Chris.
well,
They had no power.
I missed out on all the fun. Didn't
They
I?
had everything locked in the refrigerator, hoping that the power would be back on and the meat wouldn't spoil. And he'd grab some cooks, and they'd take these beautiful steaks and they'd slice them and they'd cook them and they'd put them in the bread that they serve at Ruth's Chris. And he'd show up at the radio station with a box of those sandwiches, and we'd all say, "Gee, I hope the power goes out tonight and it comes back on a day later." But people would say, "When's Mike gonna get here?" It's like, you don't even know Mike. We know the sandwiches.
We know the sandwiches.
But Bill, that goes back again to TJ. He was so generous with any kind of problems that. And I think you were at the fundraiser that night for juvenile diabetes.
Yes.
When he got on the phone with the auctioneer that was doing a live auction, and he said, "Are you finished?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You have nothing else?" He said, "No." He said, "I want you to go around the room, see how many of my friends will donate cash. I'll match whatever you raise." And I think he went around the room, got 40 grand.
Oh yeah.
TJ wrote him a check for another 40, and he came
Wow.
back to the table and said, "Come on, let's go to Rufino's and have a drink."
That was the year you were supposed to MC with me, and you were sick.
Yeah.
But yeah, TJ, I miss TJ.
He gave so much to so many people.
Yep. He was an outstanding individual.
When I worked for Clear Channel back in the day, TJ used to chuckle. He said, I sold Raleigh Mays his first radio station. And it's true, because TJ had been in a lot of businesses before he did Ruth's Chris. But he had a radio station in San Antonio that he basically bought so he could do advertising for his car dealership. And Raleigh Mays, who is the founder of Clear Channel Radio, now called iHeart, TJ's older daughters used to babysit Raleigh Mays' kids. And TJ sold Raleigh Mays that station in San Antonio. And, of course, San Antonio is still headquarters for iHeartRadio. It used to be called Clear Channel. I still think Clear Channel is probably a better known name. But, all right, once
Bill,
again...
I got to tell you one other story about
Yes.
fire. And you know my wife very well.
Who, by the way, Elaine is watching as well.
Oh, when we got married, and I moved into the house, I had my old Chiefs helmet that they gave me when I left the fire department. And it had, I never cleaned it. It had a lot of
Character.
I walked in one day and she's scrubbing that thing. And I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "It's filthy. I got to clean this up." I said, "All the memories are going down the drain."
That's not dirt. That's memories. That's history. All right, one more time. If you want to give for the Home for the Spirit, you can find it. There is a GoFundMe page that it's called precisely what the
House for the Spirit.
House for the Spirit.
House for the Spirit.
Or you can just mail a donation to the State Fire Marshal's office, Louisiana State Fire Marshal's office, 8181 Independence Boulevard, 70806, and it will get there. Now, for those of you that want to come, the ceremony today, the induction, and you and Butch Browning, right?
No, Butch's dad.
Butch's dad, Richard Browning, are being inducted today. That is at 2 p.m. at the State Fire Marshal's office, 8181 Independence Boulevard. As you go in, the state police is the first left, right?
As you come in the main gate,
Yes.
state police is right in front. You take a right, and the fire marshal's office is in the back on the left.
Well, that will be a very good thing. I will be there. And folks, if you want to come, it's going to be a brief ceremony, but you'll get to hear about the careers of these illustrious people, and I say that with a great deal of respect, Mike. Very illustrious. Your exploits, and everybody in the fire service who goes into the Hall of Fame. You had somebody from Lafayette went in as well, right? Or the
That was
Lafayette
last year. Chief in Lafayette.
Yeah.
There's Chief Willie Miller from Baton Rouge was on, because this has been around for a number of years now.
Mm-hmm.
Chief McCrossan from New Orleans, some of the old.
I remember that guy when I lived in. That was a gravelly son of a gun, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was an interesting guy.
Very nice.
I remember Chief McCrossan from my days living in New Orleans.
Well, Mike,
Another local hero.
well done. We thank you for all that you do in the community still. Again, Mike is very involved with veterans groups and also with the fire service. He's got a bunch of Air Force people that he adopts every year and kind of shows them the ropes, the young kids that go on to be colonels and generals and things like that. A lot of them probably retired now, Mike.
Yes, but they come by the house. I mean, and they tell my wife, I would have never got out of school if Mike hadn't helped me get through. And now they become colonels, and I'm so proud of that.
Oh, and speaking of which, look at the article that was published Friday, so like 4 days ago in The Advocate, about Mike and Elaine's restaurant. It's not really a restaurant, it's their house, but we all eat there. It's a really good article. It really, truly is. And Mike, we'll see you at 2 o'clock, and we thank you literally for everything. And you know what? We should have had you as our expert on how they're going to get those cranes down, but I'm sure we'll have it. I'm sure we will have it again.
It didn't quite work out the way that they'd planned down.
No, but it
cranes.
could have been a whole lot worse.
Mike, thank you for being our guest. A pleasure. Now, Friday morning, we're going to do this again, and on Friday morning, we have scheduled the State Department of Insurance. It's time, you older folks, once again for the Medicare opt-in.
Yeah, this is your Medicare supplement.
Yep.
If you've already got Medicare Part B, this is the chance where you can either get your supplement that takes care of your C and D and E and F, or change if you don't like who you've got. And I know it's confusing. But they will have an expert here that will...
Vicki Dufresne from the Department of Insurance.
We've had her on before, as a matter of fact, and she will tell us about it.
She will be here. You'll be able to type in your questions here in the chat, and she'll do her best to answer them for you.
And by the way, for those of you who are interested in the situation on Perkins Road directly in front of us, they're planning on having that roadway blocked for at least another hour. It's blocked at Cherrydale and at Stanford Acadian. You will not be able to pass because somebody took out poles and all, and Energy is having to not only restring the power lines, but they're having to put the poles up. So be advised, if you need to come to this area, you're going to need to find a way around it.
So, stay safe. We'll talk to you again on Friday morning. Till then, take care.
Bye-bye.